The SEC fell on its face in the first week of the NCAA tournament, but Tennessee and Alabama stuck around to carry the torch for the conference. Welcome into SEC Football Unfiltered, our basketball edition. This is our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. John, I don't know where we should start here because you got the bright side for the SEC of Tennessee and Alabama being in the Sweet 16 again. But you have the flip side of the coin of Kentucky and Auburn, among others, fizzling out in what was a pretty embarrassing first 2 days of the tournament for the conference. So where do you want to start? The good, the bad, the ugly? Where should we go first?
Oh, I think we can give a couple of kudos to Alabama and Tennessee for not folding, but yeah, we got to go the bad and the ugly, and there was just plenty of that. I mean, I don't know which was worse, Kentucky losing to Oakland. Most people don't even know what state Oakland is in. They know what state Kentucky basketball is in, though, and that's a problem. Uh, but Auburn, how in the world could Auburn lose to Yale? That just defies all logic.
Yeah, and I wrote a column over the weekend, John. I'm sure you saw it, where I ripped the SEC and Greg Sankey to
Yes, you
shreds.
did.
Sankey, as he often does, planted his flag quite arrogantly and smugly and let everybody know before the tournament that his conference needs a little more attention. He told ESPN before the tournament, quote, "We are giving away highly competitive opportunities for automatic qualifiers from smaller conferences, and I think the pressure is going to rise as we have more competitive basketball leagues at the top." Sankey sort of implying there that maybe the format of this tournament needs to be reconsidered. Of course, as it stands now, every conference gets one bid to the dance, and then the other half of the field is determined by at-large bids. Power conference commissioners have been whispering for weeks now about the possibility of expanding the tournament or recalibrating how bids were decided. And Sankey was certainly the boldest with his comments, not surprisingly, talking about how highly competitive bids are given away to automatic qualifiers. Well, two of those automatic qualifiers embarrassed two of the top teams from his league. And as you mentioned, Oakland beating Kentucky, Yale beating Auburn. You think the uglier those two losses was probably losing to Yale, John, from Auburn, the SEC tournament champion. But the one that's resulted in the most blowback is because of who it involves. It's Kentucky, right? And John
Sure.
Calipari, as we record this, hangs in the balance. I want to kind of pivot here in a little bit to revisiting our Final Four picks because we don't look so good right now either. But since we're on the topic of Kentucky, John, again, this is a fluid situation. May have a decision by the time our audience is listening to this. But what do you think Kentucky should do with John Calipari after a third straight NCAA tournament disappointment and the second first round loss in a 3-year span?
Well, I think Mitch Barnhart, the athletic director, needs to figure out how much John Calipari cares at this point. How much does he want to be the Kentucky basketball coach? This program is unlike any other in the SEC. There's nothing even close to it. I mean, you have good fan bases at places like Tennessee and Arkansas and elsewhere, but what the impact it has in that state, in every corner of that state, Kentucky basketball means so much. And it means so much to some people don't have a lot else going for them. In some of the poor parts or regions of that state, Kentucky basketball is something those people cling to. It just means a lot. And we talk about the SEC saying it just means more. Well, basketball just means more in Kentucky. And so there's so much at stake here. Uh, and yes, you can say, well, you can't fire Kentucky, you can't fire John Calipari because of his salary and buyout. Well, Texas A&M fired Jimbo Fisher, and we were saying the same thing about Jimbo Fisher for a while there. for quite a while. Um, but I really think it comes down to is John Calipari willing to change what he's doing? Is he is he ready at this stage of his career to re-energize? Is he willing to face the fact things aren't going well and he's not succeeding in his job? What he's doing in Kentucky is not a success story. And don't start telling me about how many people you're sending to the NBA. These guys would have gone to the NBA regardless of whether they stopped off in Lexington, Kentucky for a cup of coffee. So don't use that. I think that's what you just got to really check the temperature with Calipari here.
Yeah, I think in the aftermath of that loss, the knee-jerk thing to do was to say, cut the check for $33 million, fire Cal, fire everybody, burn it down,
Yes.
and start over. And in fact, I was watching that game with a friend of mine who lives in Kentucky. He's not a Kentucky fan, but of course he knows many, many Kentucky fans. And he received a text message from one of his buddies who's a Kentucky fan after the game. He said, "Don't text me anymore about Calipari. In fact, don't text me, period, until a new coach has been hired." And I just felt like that was sort of the mood of the fan base after the game of don't even talk to me about Cal anymore. Just let me know when the new coach is hired, and then we'll pay attention again. But cooler heads prevailed, and now we've had the benefit of a few days here, and I don't think this is a clear-cut scenario of coach got to go. I think what you said, though, is really key. Is Calipari willing to re-energize and recalibrate in a different direction? I mean, this is first and foremost a football podcast, and we've spent a lot of time talking about Jimbo Fisher the last couple of years and what went wrong for him. And it just seemed like Jimbo got really stale, he got really stubborn, and he he kind of refused to evolve to the changing sport. And frankly, he didn't have to because he had a $77 million check coming to him if he failed, and he got his failure money, and life went on. But if Calipari is willing to evolve, if he's willing to restructure some things, maybe restructure his coaching staff, maybe make a staff change, maybe go a little bit more heavily in the transfer portal than what he's ever been willing to do. And I get it from his perspective. If you can sign McDonald's All-Americans, who says no to that? And yet, this is not the one and done days of when the Calipari thing was humming. The sport has gone in a little bit different direction, and we see these more veteran teams, the teams that pluck some really good players out of the portal that maybe were from mid-majors, or someone like Dalton Connect from Northern Colorado, right? I mean, he's one of the country's best players now for Tennessee. He was a portal guy, started at JUCO, went to Northern Colorado. I mean, what was it, Jack Golke? The guy was draining 10 threes against Kentucky in that first round loss. I mean, this is a Division II transfer. Point being, you can help your team. Doesn't with guys that aren't necessarily McDonald's All-Americans. Basketball is a different sport than football in that way. Football really is talent assembly. Get as many blue chippers as possible. But basketball has become more and more about, yes, getting some good high school recruits, but also finding the right mix of veterans, transfer guys that have been on the NCAA tournament stage before. I think that's so important. You heard Calipari talk about that after the loss of, young team. These guys haven't been through this before. That's true, but to me, that's not really a fair excuse. The pressures in March are different. It helps to have some guys that have been through the battles before on that stage. And so I do think, he may need, if they're going to keep him, he might have to force himself to change the way he's going to look at things a little bit and sort of build a bit of a mix between All-American high school guys and a little bit more heavily look into that portal.
Well, as I said, I think John Calipari has to ask himself. It's not just AD Mitch Barnhart asking Calipari, how much does this matter to you? I think it's so important that, I mean, Calipari has to know obviously he knows how much Kentucky basketball matters to the general populace, but how much does it matter to him? Can he match the fans' passion about this job? So, but also in recruiting, I think, there's an inherent flaw in this one and done philosophy, because these players, you talk about how it would be a childhood dream for so many players to play in a Final Four or even an NCAA tournament. But these one and done players, I'm not so sure they look at things that way. They've kind of been, I mean, they probably already have an entourage well before they leave high school. To them, the NCAA college basketball is just a stop along the way. Here, it's like it's pretty perfunctory. It's just something you have to do in order to get the next step. To the next step, you're off to the NBA. You expect to be playing in the NBA All-Star game one Sunday afternoon. Your goal is not to make it to the Final Four or win a national title. I think you really need to find some players that care that much about Kentucky basketball, about winning at that level, and you can still get some of those one and done guys, but I don't know that you can get a whole class of them anymore. You just could see that team tightening up all during that game against Oakland. It was, you know what it was almost like to me, what I was thinking about it, it was like for these freshmen who've never been in the NCAA tournament, it was like it hit them all of a sudden. Like, hey, this is no big deal, man. Here we're Kentucky. We're NBA. We're the best. We're better than anybody. I don't care how old they are. We are the best. And everybody tells us we're the best. And so here we go. And then they get out there in that environment and they sense what's at stake. And they kind of looked overwhelmed by it.
I mentioned that this was not this was not the tournament that the SEC envisioned, and we'll see how far Tennessee and Alabama go and saving some face from the conference. But the SEC in the first round went 3-5. We mentioned the two major upsets, Kentucky and Auburn, going down, but you also had, Oregon just truck sticked South Carolina and pulled the mask off them. Florida lost to Colorado in a pretty thrilling game, and then Mississippi State got absolutely manhandled by Michigan State. So 3-5 after the first round. Then Texas A&M went down in a thriller against Houston in the second round. No real shame in that. And then here Tennessee and Alabama are in the Sweet 16. I guess how embarrassing, how bad of a look is this for the conference, John? Do you think it's that big a deal? I mean, I slapped him around a little bit over the weekend, but sure, what's a columnist going to do? But is this something just you think 48 hours from now, nobody's worried about this, and it's like, oh, well, still a good year for the league, got 8 teams in. Who cares if 5 of them lost in the first round? Or do you think that this is something that's going to hang around this league for a while? Because we heard so much going into the tournament, really the last couple of years, about how this is such a better league. It's so much deeper. Look at the strides the conference has made. And I think there's some truth to that. There's better coaches in this league. The league schedule's a little bit better. It has figured out the formula to get more teams in the tournament. And yet still, the SEC has not produced a national champion in this sport since 2012. And really, during Sankey's entire time as commissioner, he was hired as commish in 2016, got elevated up, and the SEC's only had 2 Final Four teams in that span. So on the whole, the conference has gotten better, I think. But the NCAA tournament, particularly this year, but really even the last several years, conference doesn't totally live up to the hype when it comes to the big dance, I don't think. So what's your take on just how bad of a look this is, and does it really matter for the SEC?
Well, I think for perspective, you have to remember this is a football league. And the SEC wants to do well in everything. And it does for the most part. There's no better baseball league. And with Oklahoma joining the conference, there's no better softball league. And this is a premier football league. And men's basketball matters. Women's basketball has South Carolina, the dominant force right now. LSU, a defending national champion. So, but I think one way that this could bother the SEC is maybe just if you project what a college football playoff could look like when you expanded it. And I think the SEC probably wants it expanded to the point where you include everyone but Vanderbilt. and you get a lot of teams in there. But what if they don't perform as well in the playoff as they do in the regular season? I think that would be terrifying to the SEC. But I just don't. I don't think it matters. I don't see other than Kentucky, and I think to Tennessee to a degree. If Tennessee would have faltered early, you would have had some of that. Basketball really matters to Tennessee. Not the Kentucky level, but it matters a lot more than it does to other schools. So yeah, that would have been. I just I don't know how much it matters really. I just think they'll move on from this. They got good coaches based on the track records. They're spending money on basketball. They're recruiting well, and they'll just look at this. Oh, it's a crapshoot playing in the NCAA tournament.
I tend to agree with you. I think the only thing is it really your comments as a commissioner ring hollow when you're bemoaning the idea of giving away auto bids to mid majors and suggesting that they need to be recrafted toward your ninth best team in the conference. Like, let's put that to rest.
Yeah.
We don't need this idea of taking a bid away from Oakland and say giving it to LSU, who went 500 and lost in the first round of the NIT. Let's put a pin in that. That idea is terrible. And this tournament, once again, this year reminded you that there's really no place for arrogance in this tournament. So if we can put a pin in that, yeah, I don't think this is that big a deal for the SEC. As you said, football is and always will be the moneymaker. Basketball really matters to a couple schools. Other schools, quite frankly, I think they're fine being in the dance, and it might hurt for about 48 hours if they lose. And then by about 72 hours, it's what day is the spring game? How's the left guard looking in spring practice? Now, that's not the case at Kentucky. And to your point, it wouldn't have been the case at Tennessee had they lost in the second round. But at a lot of places, that is the reality. It stings for a few days, and then it's on to football. Speaking of stinging for a few days, John, we had our final four picks on the pod last week. You've already lost two of your four. I've lost one of my four because we both picked Kentucky to the Final Four, and you also had Auburn to the Final Four. I got three of my four standing. I had UConn, North Carolina, and Creighton. You have two of your four standing, North Carolina and Creighton. My question to you now is, though, John, if I gave you UConn or the field, who would you take? You could have all other 15 teams entering the Sweet 16, or you could have UConn. Which one would you go with?
I would still take the field, but I would do so in a shaky fashion because going into the tournament, the same question. I didn't think UConn would make the Final Four because it did it last year. I don't think of it as a super team. It lost three players to the NBA, but now I'm starting to think it is a super team.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll just carve up this tournament field the way it did the last one. I still think the Final Four will be much tougher. But UConn, what has impressed me so much about UConn is the way it just went out and took care of business. Think of how we both watched a lot of basketball this past weekend, and think all of the games that we watched, and we see that. Well, Kentucky, we've talked about Kentucky against Oakland. We see Auburn against Yale. We see games, even when the teams win, when they start out and they don't put away the underdog right away. That's your first big mistake. The longer they get oxygen, the better they breathe and the stronger they get. And we've seen that time and time again. But UConn just says, no, you guys aren't on the same level as we are. We're going to prove it in about 5 or 6 minutes.
John, are Rick Barnes and Nate Oates the two best coaches in this conference right now? I'm not talking about like lifetime achievement awards, but I want to set the groundwork for that a little bit. Alabama now in its second straight Sweet 16. Now, last year was a bit of a disappointment that they didn't go farther because they were a number one seed, but second straight Sweet 16 for Nate Oates at Alabama. Gone to the Sweet 16 three times now. in the last 4 years. Now, the Elite Eight would really be a breakthrough that has eluded Nate Oates in this program, even during this really good stretch the last few years. So that's the situation at Alabama. Then you look at Tennessee, and Rick Barnes has caught some heat over the years for losing in the NCAA tournament, maybe before his seed suggested he should, or being upset, by teams that are not blue blood programs. Loyola Chicago comes to mind. They lost in the first round a couple years ago to Oregon State, lost to Florida Atlantic last year when FAU went to the Final Four. But, if you look at it overall, Rick Barnes now has his second straight Sweet 16, his third Sweet 16 overall at Tennessee, his ninth Sweet 16 appearance in his career. And there's other big name coaches in this conference, John Calipari, Bruce Pearl. But I'm wondering who you think the two best guys are going right now. I guess if you could start a draft, you could have anybody in the conference to head up your basketball program for, let's say, the next 3 years. Because some of these guys are older, so I don't want to look at it from a 10-year lens. Next 3 years, you could have any of these SEC coaches. Would you take Barnes and Oates, the first two? Or would you still think about Calipari or Pearl or somebody else?
Well, Calipari, I wonder about his passion for his job now. Bruce Pearl, nothing lacking with passion as far as he's concerned, but his teams haven't fared as well as in the tournament recently. The way so many teams went out in flames in the first two rounds from the SEC, not doing well in the NCAA tournament isn't such a negative, because nobody's doing really well in the NCAA tournament. And see, that's really the only way criticism you could really have of Rick Barnes is of his whole career. He made one Final Four when he was at Texas. He's recruited great. He's developed great. He's great at rebuilding programs. He's pretty much done everything. It's just that one thing lacking, and it's a significant thing because March Madness is what this sport is all about. But when I look at it within the context of an SEC, I guess I would still say the two coaches I would pick would be Rick Barnes and still Bruce Pearl, because with Bruce Pearl, I can't ignore what he's done with Auburn basketball and what that arena is like and what it used to be like. And who in the world ever thought that Auburn would have an incredible home court advantage like it does now under Bruce Pearl? He's done such a great job of promoting. And that, I guess, I'm more sold on him than I am on Nate Oates. I do give Nate Oates credit in this regard, or his team at least. All year long, we've watched their pretty much matador defense, people blowing by them consistently, piling up huge scores, and just can't play defense. Don't care about defense. Just want to shoot up a three as fast as you can, and that's not going to work against really good teams. But I thought Alabama played really good defense in that second round game. That is one of the most surprising things, maybe the most surprising thing we saw in a good way from SEC schools.
Yeah, I think Alabama too was maybe fortunate not to have to face St. Mary's in the second round. I know St. Mary's did not look good in the first round in their loss to Grand Canyon, but St. Mary's really plays like a grinded out defensive style. It would have been interesting to see who would have been able to dictate the style of play if they had to face St. Mary's. So I do think Alabama got kind of a fortunate draw having to so far only play a 13 and a 12 seed to reach the Sweet 16. But yeah, it is an interesting debate, with Pearl, John, because he's taken 3 different programs to the Sweet 16 or beyond. He's gotten Auburn to a Final Four back in 2019, but the last 3 years, he went second round and out, and now this year losing in the first round, whereas Oates has the 3 Sweet 16s in the last 4 years. And I think to your point of like, well, none of these SEC teams have been having that much success in the tournament. I guess that's where I almost lean toward Barnes and Oates, because you're right. And that's where I sort of set the bar of success for like, well, at least get to the Sweet 16.
Yeah.
Oates and Barnes have been good about delivering Sweet 16s. It's the problem is getting past that. And I do think your perspective on a season changes a little bit of like losing in the first or second round versus Sweet 16. Usually, if you're making it to the Sweet 16, hasn't always been the case for Tennessee, but oftentimes if you're losing in the Sweet 16s, you go down to a good program. And you can say, well, had a great season, but just ran into a buzzsaw there. And a lot of times you're frustrated, but you still take pride in the season you had. I think the perspective changes a lot if you're going down in round one or round two. I mean, it's much different to say we were one of the best 16 teams in the country versus we were one of the best 68 teams in the country. So I think I might at this point lean toward Barnes and Oates in my pecking order just because they've been so good the last handful of years of at least getting their programs to the Sweet 16. And if they could get to an Elite Eight, I mean, Tennessee's just got one Elite Eight in program history. Alabama has only one Elite Eight in program history. Neither program has ever been to a Final Four. If Alabama could upset North Carolina, beat a blue blood, get to the Elite Eight, or Tennessee can beat Creighton and get to that second Elite in program history, I mean, I think that would really hammer it home for me that in a basketball coach draft, I'd probably go Barnes and Oates at this point, and wouldn't be terribly upset if I wound up with Pearl or probably even Calipari. If, to your point, he's still passionate about this thing.
That line of demarcation that you draw between the second round and the Sweet 16 is so significant to me because this sport is all about March Madness, and we have the anticipation building up to that selection Sunday with the seeding, the bracket, what region you're in. There's so much made of this. It's a media firestorm. And then you go into the tournament. Think about it from an SEC perspective, 8 teams going into the tournament. And you look at those teams and say, you could look at any one of them and say, that team could be a tough out. So you've got all this buildup and anticipation going into and then boom, you're out in the first round or even the second round, and off the tournament goes without you. It goes on to another week of anticipation building toward the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, and eventually the Final Four. So here you are, you're right in the middle of everything, and then boom, you're gone. You don't even exist anymore. I think it's stunning to fans, and I think that's why those losses matter so much in those first 2 weekends. To me, it would have been devastating for Tennessee fans if UT had lost to the other UT in the second round, if Texas had prevailed, Barnes's previous school. But now, so what? If you lose in the Sweet 16, I mean, loses to Creighton, it's a good team. And all those teams in the Sweet 16 are good. As you mentioned, you get to the Sweet 16, there are a lot of good teams at that juncture. So yeah, I think that's really significant, how much that matters and how much the disparity is between from one weekend to the next in the tournament.
So the 2 games we got coming up this week in the Sweet 16 involving the SEC, you meant Tennessee versus Creighton, Alabama versus North Carolina. I really think North Carolina is going to be a tough out at this point. They're 2 veteran stars, R.J. Davis and Armando Bacot. I mean, those guys were sophomore starters on their national runner-up team from a couple years ago. Now they're their senior studs, sort of kind of comparing that to the McDonald's All-American one-and-doneers we were talking about from Kentucky earlier in the episode. So I like North Carolina in that game, and I would actually still pick Creighton, a team I was really high on coming into the tournament, against Tennessee, even though Creighton got a real scare from a red-hot Oregon team in the second round, needed double overtime to beat Oregon. But Creighton also has a veteran team. These guys have been through the tournament before, made it the Elite Eight last year. They got 4 premier scorers. Now, they don't have much beyond that. They could score 80 points in a game, and 4 guys combined for 74 of the 80. But those guys usually don't have off nights. Usually, at least 3, if not all 4, are pretty well clicking on the same night. But so I'm going to take both SEC teams to go down in the Sweet 16. I would say I like Tennessee's chances better than I do Alabama's, though. I think Alabama's going to run into, a Final Four caliber team there in North Carolina. I really like what I've seen from North Carolina lately. I know they lost the ACC tournament, but that didn't really turn down my outlook for them. Whereas Creighton did look a little bit vulnerable against Oregon. If Tennessee can get that offense going, which they couldn't really rely on against Texas, they had win with defense and rebounding. If they can get Dalton Connect and that offense going, I think they could beat Creighton. But I'll say the SEC goes 0-2. Your picks in these games, and also if you're picking the SEC to go 0-2, which one do you think it's more likely that the SEC team would win?
I don't give Alabama that much hope against North Carolina. I think Alabama's style of play will be quite accommodating to North Carolina. Let's go up tempo, shoot the three. Hey, great. Thank you very much. We'll play that game all night long. I just can't see Alabama winning that game. But boy, if it did, you talk about, then my image of Nate Oates changed, because when you beat a blue blood at that stage of the tournament, and then you go from a team that just likes to run and gun and shoot the threes and is going to make the Sweet 16, but that's all. Now you can be on your way. Okay, this is more serious business than what you can offer. So no, I don't. But I like Tennessee's chances a lot more. That game's really kind of a toss-up to me. I think when I saw the line, Tennessee was a 2.5-point favorite. That was a line I saw right away, and it may not still be. I don't know. One of the things I noticed in looking at Creighton's losses was opposing team scorers came up big. They had Providence, its two top scorers, combined for 99 points in 2 games against Creighton. Providence won both games. St. John's top scorer had 27 when St. John's beat Creighton. And even in defeat, Oregon pressed Creighton about as far as it could. It was a 2-man attack. And Jermaine Cousinard just was unstoppable, scoring from everywhere. I thought he ran out of gas in double overtime, but substitute Dalton Connect for Cousinard, and I could see him scoring 36, 37 points on Creighton. He hasn't had a big game in the last 3. Shooting has been a tad off. I think he's kind of due. So if I had to pick somebody, I could flip a coin. Maybe I'll pick give one SEC team a chance to go to the Elite Eight, and I'll pick Tennessee.
Yeah, I reseeded the Sweet 16 teams in a column this week, John. You mentioned this being a coin flip game, and I obviously agree, because I reseeded 1 through 16 of the teams standing, and I have Creighton as my number 8 and Tennessee as my number 9. So I see this as the equivalent of an 8, not the team's caliber, but I mean, just the fact that it's a 50-50 game, it feels like. I agree with you. It feels like one of those 8-9 games in the first round. All right, so we'll close with this, John. Let's throw our old Final Fours out the window. Again, I had 3 of my 4 still standing. You had 2 of your 4, but we can change our picks. We can replace our teams that lost. If we're starting from scratch here, I'm wanting to know who your Final Four would be. I'll give you a moment to think about and bat lead off here. I'm going to stick with UConn as my Final Four team from the upper left quadrant. That would be the East. And I would stick with my UConn pick to win the national championship. I'm going to stick with my North Carolina pick to the Final Four out of that West region. I had Kentucky. They lost. So I need a new pick there. I'm going with Marquette out of the South. Like Houston, too, you wonder if Houston survived its one scare en route to the Final Four. But with Tyler Kolek back, the point guard from Marquette, he's gone for a double-double in points and assists in their first 2 games. He'd been out toward the end of the year with injury. Looks like he's fine now. They held off a hot Colorado team in the second round. So I'm going to go Marquette to the Final Four from that region. And, boy, I'm tempted to pivot to Purdue with how they've cruised into the Sweet 16, John, and especially if if Zach Edey continues to get all the calls as he has all season. But I've liked Creighton for about 2 months now. You know this. I just can't quit the Jays. I am sticking with them. I'm sticking with Creighton to the Final Four somehow, some way. Those that four-headed attack they got are going to keep going for 20 points a game and just score all their points en route to the Final Four. So I'm making a switch. I needed to switch with Kentucky, and I'm sliding Marquette into that spot. But otherwise, I'm staying with UConn, North Carolina, Creighton, and I'm adding Marquette to the mix. How about your 4?
Well, in commenting on your 4, you have a great history of loyalty.
Yeah.
You stick with the team that you like until it hits an iceberg, and then you're the first one off the ship. Give me
Once it's going down, I'm out of there.
Yeah, huh? give me that lifeboat. I'm out of here now. I'm done. I was with you all the way, guys, until now. Boy, I tell you, I look at this, and I know, and I did in my original brag, got to pick upsets to get this Final Four right. That's your only hope. You can't count on number 1 seeds making it. They're about 1-4 every year. But I'm doing a 180 now. Houston, I'm a big believer when a team wins a game it could have lost, that it dodges a bullet, so to speak, and I don't know. It's almost as though Lady Luck's riding with it now, and I think it imbues the team with confidence. So, best game of the tournament to me, Houston and Texas A&M. Houston had it won, lost it, and then still won it. So, before I saw the Big 12 tournament, Houston was my pick to win it all. And when I watched it score 41 points against Iowa State, I couldn't get away from that team fast enough. I've rejoined the Cougars. So I would have Houston making it. I would still go with North Carolina. That was an original pick.
Mm-hmm.
Tempted to go with Purdue here instead of Creighton. But I tell you, I'm going to take the long shot here, and I'm going to pick Gonzaga.
Whoa.
To win that.
To go to the Final Four, not just to beat
go,
Purdue,
no, to win.
Okay.
No, to win both.
They're playing well. Yeah.
They really are. This turned out to be a little tougher region than I thought it would be because Gonzaga played better than I thought it would. I really like Purdue, but I just don't think Purdue, its tournament history just scream in my ear, we don't make it.
Mm-hmm.
We falter near the finish line. And even if Tennessee would beat Creighton, it would be a huge win for the team and the program and Rick Barnes. But if it's good enough to beat Creighton, I don't know if it would beat Gonzaga too. I don't know if it can shoot well enough in back-to-back games. And I think in this region where you got 3 really good offensive teams, and then you got a 4th in Tennessee that has a great offensive player, the team that wins it is going to have to really be hot shooting 2 games in a row. So I'll go with Gonzaga.
And how about the East region? Are you going UConn or are you taking?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Doesn't even need saying, huh?
No, I just forgot about that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week. See if any SEC teams are still standing and see what happens to John Calipari, if he's still got that fire, if Kentucky still thinks he has that fire in the most scrutinized basketball job in the SEC. We'll be here with you until the end of the tournament, and we're going to get back to some football talk soon. Don't worry about that. Thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered, talking basketball.